Chief Obafemi Awolowo was the Federal Commissioner for Finance and Vice Chairman of the Federal Executive Council under General Yakubu Gowon's military government during the Nigeria-Biafra War. As the Commissioner for Finance, Awolowo was instrumental in economic policies, including wartime resource allocation, currency reform, and trade controls. In the midst of the conflicts, Nigeria imposed a blockade on Biafra by land, sea, and air to weaken its war efforts. This blockade restricted not only arms and ammunition, but also food and medical supplies. Starvation became a weapon of war. Images of emaciated Biafran children with swollen stomachs shocked the world and drew massive humanitarian responses. In this episode, we investigate how Awolowo starved Biafra, the background to the blockade, Awolowo's actions during the war, and the catastrophe that followed. When Nigeria descended into civil war in July 1967, the federal military government under General Yakubu Gowon appointed a civilian team to manage the political and economic dimensions of the conflict. Among them was Chief Obafemi Awolowo, the former premier of the Western region and leader of the action group, who had only recently been released from imprisonment by the military government. As Federal Commissioner for Finance and Vice Chairman of the Federal Executive Council, Awolowo effectively became the most powerful civilian voice in the Gowon regime. Chief Obafemi Awolowo's portfolio meant that he was directly responsible for managing the finances of the war effort, stabilizing the Nigerian economy, and formulating economic policies towards the breakaway Eastern region. The federal government adopted a strategy of economic strangulation designed to weaken Biafra's ability to sustain itself. While Gowon provided the military leadership, Awolowo was the intellectual force behind the fiscal and economic aspects. From the outbreak of hostilities, the federal government imposed a land, sea, and air blockade on the eastern region. The official justification was military, to cut off the rebels from supplies of arms, ammunition, and resources that might prolong the war. However, the blockade also meant that food and medicine were prevented from entering Biafra. The effectiveness of the blockade was evident. Biafra, landlocked after federal forces captured Bonny and later Port Harcourt, became entirely dependent on food brought in through clandestine airlifts organized by church groups and humanitarian agencies. The federal government insisted that food could only be delivered through Nigeria's Red Cross under its supervision. This condition was rejected by Biafra, which accused Lagos of seeking to poison food supplies and demanded neutral channels. Awolowo defended the blockade on economic and strategic grounds. He saw it as a means to bring the war to a quicker resolution by denying the secessionists the resources to continue fighting. The Yoruba chief understood the power of fiscal tools and was convinced that a decisive blockade would shorten the war, reducing overall casualties. But the moral cost was staggering. By late 1968, images of starving Biafran children with distended bellies flooded Western media, shocking the world and turning international opinion against Nigeria. As famine deepened, international organizations and religious groups mounted one of the largest humanitarian airlifts in history. Catholic and Protestant missions, working with the International Committee of the Red Cross, flew food into Biafra by night from bases in Sao Tome and Gabon. The federal government denounced these operations as illegal and threatened to shoot down relief planes. Awolowo maintained that all relief must pass through the federal control channels. His argument was that permitting independent deliveries would prolong the war by indirectly aiding the Biafran states. Critics, however, argued that this position condemned millions to unnecessary suffering. According to estimates, between 1 and 2 million people, mostly women and children, died of starvation during the conflict. The episode revealed the deep tension between military strategy and humanitarian principles. For Awolowo, the integrity of the Nigerian state was paramount. For the relief agencies, the imperative was to save lives regardless of political implications. The most enduring memory of the war is of skeletal children with hollow eyes and emaciated faces that came to symbolize Biafra's suffering. Medical workers used the word kwashiorkor to describe the protein deficiency that ravaged children cut off from milk, beans, and fish. In 1969, the US State Department estimated that 6,000 Biafrans were dying each day from starvation. Journalists like Frederick Forsyth, who reported from Biafra, accused the Nigerian government and particularly Awolowo of genocide by starvation. The images galvanized international activism. However, within Nigeria, Awolowo and his colleagues remained unmoved. They insisted that relief would only flow once Biafra surrendered. The hunger of millions thus became leverage in the federal government's strategy. Defenders of Awolowo argued that he has been unfairly vilified. They note that he did not single-handedly design federal policy but acted within a collective military government. Moreover, they argued that the refusal of Biafran leader Ojukwu to accept federal supervised relief contributed significantly to the famine. Awolowo himself, in later years, denied that he pursued starvation as a policy. In interviews, he maintained that he sought to protect the economy from collapse and that the blockade was primarily a military necessity. Nonetheless, the moral weight of his starvation policy, combined with his role as the chief economic strategist, makes it difficult to absolve him entirely. Even if he did not invent the blockade, he justified and rationalized it in terms that gave it intellectual legitimacy. Scholarly opinion remains divided. Writers like Chinua Achebe argued that Awolowo's policies were motivated by ethnic bias and constituted a crime against humanity. Achebe wrote in his memoir, There Was a Country, that Awolowo saw the war as an opportunity to achieve his political ambition. Recent scholarship has also emphasized the role of international politics. Britain, Nigeria's principal ally, tacitly supported the blockade as a means of securing oil supplies and preventing the fragmentation of its former colony. In this light, Awolowo was not a lone actor but part of a larger system that prioritized state sovereignty and geopolitical interests over humanitarian concerns. Did Awolowo starve Biafra? The evidence suggests that while he was not the sole architect of starvation, he was its most articulate defender. His economic policies, his insistence on federal control of relief, and his infamous remark on starvation as a weapon of war all contributed to the tragedy that befell millions of Biafran civilians. Awolowo remains a towering figure in Nigerian history, a visionary in education and governance, but his role in Biafra is a stain that history cannot erase. Interestingly, on the other side of the Niger, the Biafran head of state, Emeka Ojukwu, also played a role in starving his people. You can check out the full story on how Ojukwu starved Biafra in our next episode.